In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations.
The silence wasn't just loud, it was surgical. One moment, the royal doors were simply distant. The next, they were sealed so tightly that even whispers couldn't pass through. And now, insiders are claiming something that changes everything. Not a disagreement, not a feud, but a calculated, irreversible move. A zero-contact protocol quietly initiated by Prince William against his own brother, Prince Harry, while King Charles III stands in complete, almost chilling silence. Because this isn't just distance anymore. This feels like erasure. And what makes it more unsettling is how it didn't explode overnight. There were no dramatic press conferences, no official decrees stamped with royal authority. No, this unfolded in shadows, quietly, deliberately, like a plan that had been forming long before anyone realized what was coming. It started, they say, with a shift so subtle that even palace insiders didn't immediately recognize it. Charles, once seen as the balancing force between his sons, began stepping back. Not publicly, not in a way that would spark headlines, but internally. Decisions he would normally weigh in on, passed along. Conversations he once mediated, left untouched. And suddenly, the emotional center of the monarchy began to hollow out, creating space for someone else to step in. That someone was William. But this wasn't just about stepping up. This was about drawing lines. Hard ones. Permanent ones. Because behind closed doors, a new philosophy was taking shape. One that insiders now describe as ruthless in its clarity. No more gray areas. No more half in, half out. No more blurred identities between royal duty and personal independence. You are either fully inside the system or you are completely out. And according to those whispers, William didn't just believe in this idea, he enforced it. The so-called zero-contact protocol wasn't announced, but its presence began showing up everywhere. Calls that used to be answered, now ignored. Messages left without reply. Invitations, not just declined, never even extended. It wasn't confrontation, it was absence. Strategic absence. And that's what made it so powerful. Because silence can't be argued with. There was no public fight to react to, no statement to deny, no official rule to challenge. Just a growing realization that Harry was no longer part of the internal conversation at all. Not delayed, not reconsidered, just removed. Even long-standing traditions began to shift. Places that once symbolized unity, like Balmoral, suddenly became zones of controlled access. The rhythm of royal gatherings changed. Subtly, but unmistakably. Where once there was overlap, now there was careful separation. Where once there was family, now there were boundaries. And behind it all, William remained steady, not reactive, not emotional, just firm. Because from his perspective, this wasn't about personal feelings anymore. This was about protecting something much larger, the monarchy itself. To him, the danger wasn't Harry leaving. The danger was Harry existing in between, outside the system, yet still carrying its weight, its titles, its influence. That in-between space, that's what William saw as the real threat. A crack in the structure, a weakness that could spread. So instead of negotiating with it, he eliminated it. Clean, final, absolute. But here's where it gets even more unsettling. Charles didn't stop it. No intervention. No visible attempt to soften the divide. No public reassurance that things could still be repaired. Just silence. And in royal language, silence isn't neutral. It's permission. Some insiders are now suggesting that this silence isn't passive at all, but intentional. That Charles, facing his own pressures, his own limitations, may have quietly allowed William to take full control of the situation. Not because he agreed with every decision, but because he no longer had the capacity to manage it himself. And if that's true, then this isn't just a family conflict, it's a power transfer. One that happened without ceremony, without announcement, but with consequences that are impossible to ignore. Because once a zero-contact protocol exists, even unofficially, it changes everything. It doesn't just create distance, it rewrites relationships. It turns what was once emotional into something structural, systematic, controlled. And that's why this feels different from anything we've seen before. This isn't anger. This isn't a temporary fallout waiting to be resolved over time. This feels permanent. Even attempts at reconciliation, they say, are now viewed through a completely different lens. It's no longer about whether Harry wants to return. It's about whether there is anything left to return to. Because when access is removed at this level, communication, presence, inclusion, rebuilding isn't just difficult, it becomes almost impossible. And yet, what makes this even more intense is the contrast. Because on one side, you have Harry, still visible, still speaking, still shaping his own narrative. And on the other, you have William, silent, controlled, methodical, shaping the structure itself. Two completely different approaches, two completely different futures. And right in the middle, a father who has chosen not to step in, which raises the question no one inside the palace is answering out loud. Was this always the plan? Was this zero contact protocol a reaction or the final step in something that had been building for years? Because if you look closely, the signs were always there. The slow distancing, the tightening rules, the growing discomfort with blurred roles, the shift from diplomacy to discipline. This didn't come out of nowhere. This was built piece by piece, decision by decision, silence by silence, until one day the connection simply wasn't there anymore. And now the monarchy stands in a new phase, colder, more defined, less forgiving. A system where belonging isn't flexible, where loyalty isn't assumed, where the line between inside and outside isn't just visible, it's enforced. And at the center of it all stands William, not waiting, not hesitating, but deciding. And the most unsettling part is this: once a system like this locks into place, it doesn't just affect one person, it reshapes everything around it, quietly forcing every relationship, every tradition, every future interaction to bend around a new invisible rule that no one officially announced. Yet everyone inside the palace now understands without needing it explained, because when Prince William draws a line, it isn't temporary, it isn't symbolic, it becomes structure. And structure inside a monarchy is almost impossible to undo, because this is where the story takes a darker turn, the kind that doesn't shout but slowly suffocates any chance of reversal, because insiders now claim the zero contact protocol didn't stop at silence. It evolved, it expanded, it became what some are calling an internal filtration system, where every mention, every discussion, every possibility involving Prince Harry is quietly redirected, minimized, or shut down before it even reaches the center of decision-making. Meaning, it's not just about cutting off communication, it's about removing influence entirely, like erasing a presence without ever saying the word ban. And that's where the real power lies, not in dramatic actions, but in controlled absence. Because when someone is no longer part of conversations, no longer part of planning, no longer part of future scenarios, they don't just lose access, they lose relevance. And in a system built on visibility and hierarchy, losing relevance is the closest thing to disappearing without actually leaving the world stage. What makes this even more intense is how carefully it has been layered, because from the outside, everything still looks composed, dignified, perfectly aligned with tradition, but behind that polished surface, the internal mechanics have shifted so sharply that even long-standing royal rhythms feel different, tighter, more calculated, almost as if every movement is now being filtered through a single principle: protection over reconciliation. And standing firmly beside this shift is Catherine, Princess of Wales, not in a loud or confrontational way, but in a way that reinforces the direction without ever needing to publicly justify it, because those close to the inner circle suggest that her influence isn't about pushing decisions. It's about stabilizing them, ensuring that once a boundary is set, it holds, especially when it comes to protecting their immediate family and the environment around them, which insiders say has become a non-negotiable priority in this entire situation. But here's where the tension quietly intensifies, because every system that creates distance also creates pressure, and pressure has a way of building in silence until it finds a crack. And right now, that crack seems to be forming around one question that no one is willing to address directly. What happens if Harry pushes back? Because up until now, the silence has been one-sided, controlled, managed, but if that silence is ever broken from the other side, if a new revelation, a new interview, a new unexpected move suddenly enters the equation, it could disrupt the entire balance that this protocol relies on. Because systems built on control depend on predictability, and unpredictability is the one thing that can destabilize even the most carefully designed structure. And yet, despite that risk, there is no visible shift in William's stance, no softening, no hint of reconsideration, which suggests something even more decisive, that this isn't a temporary measure waiting to be reassessed. This is the end state, the final form of a strategy that has moved past the point of negotiation. Meanwhile, King Charles III remains the quiet center of this storm, but not in the way many expected, because his silence is no longer being interpreted as hesitation, it's being read as alignment, as a deliberate choice to let this new structure take hold without interference, which raises a deeper, more unsettling possibility that this entire shift may not just have his approval, but his silent endorsement. And if that's true, then the implications stretch far beyond a family divide, because it suggests a monarchy that is actively redefining its boundaries in real time, choosing clarity over connection, discipline over flexibility, and long-term stability over emotional repair, even if that means accepting a fracture that may never fully heal. Because what's emerging now isn't just a response to one situation, it's a new blueprint, a model for how the institution will handle challenges moving forward, one where ambiguity is eliminated early, where roles are strictly enforced, and where the cost of stepping outside the system isn't negotiation, it's separation. And that's why this moment feels so final, because once a monarchy commits to this kind of structure, reversing it doesn't just require changing a decision, it requires undoing an entire philosophy. And philosophies, especially ones built around survival and control, are the hardest things to dismantle. So now the question isn't whether Harry can return or whether reconciliation is possible. The question is whether the system itself would even allow it anymore. Because when the rules are no longer written, but enforced through behavior, through silence, through absence, through controlled access, then the door doesn't just close, it disappears. And somewhere between the silence of Prince William, the absence of Prince Harry, and the stillness of King Charles III, a new version of the monarchy is quietly taking shape. One that is sharper, colder, more defined, and far less forgiving than anything that came before it. Because in the end, this was never just about two brothers drifting apart. It was about a system deciding what it will tolerate, what it will protect, and what it is willing to let go of completely. And right now, it looks like it has already made that decision.